Have you ever wondered why suffering seems to arrive just when everything seems to be falling apart? As if life waits for the most fragile moment to tighten its grip. But what if this pain wasn't a punishment? What if, in fact, it was a call, a silent whisper of existence trying to wake you up? Alan Watts, one of the most provocative thinkers of the last century, believed that suffering is not a mistake, nor an obstacle to be eliminated. It is the awakening of consciousness, a reminder, often harsh, that we are asleep, living on autopilot, identified with an ego that separates us from the deeper truth about who we truly are. How many times have you tried to escape pain, disguise it with distractions, occupations, addictions? Most of us do, and yet, it returns. Because as Watts said, as long as we resist reality, pain will become louder and louder. It doesn't come to destroy us, but to show us something we've forgotten, that behind all suffering, there is a portal, an invitation to awaken. Have you ever been there? That moment when everything seems to be falling apart, but deep down something starts to shift? A different silence sets in. A new perception emerges, as if something inside you begins to see more clearly. It's at this point that many give up, but it's also where some awaken. What you're about to discover may surprise you, because suffering, however uncomfortable it may seem, is not an enemy. It's a teacher, and perhaps, for the first time, you're ready to listen to it. Watts didn't offer ready-made answers, but rather questions that became key points. He talked about how the ego, this idea of a separate self, builds walls between us and reality, and it is precisely on these walls that suffering strikes, not to hurt, but to tear down. Because real pain, according to him, arises from the conflict between who we truly are and who we believe we should be. Stay with me until the end, because this journey isn't about resisting, but about understanding, about facing the pain head-on without running away, and seeing what it's trying to reveal. After all, what if everything you have called suffering until now was, in fact, your true awakening? But why then do we resist so much? Why are we so afraid to face pain head-on, when it's precisely what shows us the way back home? Perhaps it's because we've been taught to see suffering as weakness, as something wrong. From an early age, we learn to hide what we feel, to disguise anguish with productivity, to camouflage emptiness with distractions. And the more we do this, the further we move away from true consciousness, the one that observes, that feels, that perceives without filters. Alan Watts spoke about this with almost disconcerting clarity. Suffering is not a failure in the system. It's the system itself trying to reorganize itself. When you feel emotional pain, anxiety, confusion, it's not because something is broken inside you, it's because something is trying to emerge. A silent transformation happening behind the scenes of your mind. But to see this, you have to stop identifying with the voice in your head. Watts said, "You are not your thoughts, you are the one who observes them." And this phrase, when truly understood, has the power to turn everything upside down. Because what fuels suffering most is not the pain itself, but the storyline we create around it. The narrative of, "I can't take it anymore, this always happens to me, nothing will change." But who's saying this? Who is this voice repeating old patterns, projecting catastrophes, reliving past traumas, and fearing what hasn't even happened yet? This voice is the ego. And the ego, however convincing it may seem, is just a character, a mental construct based on memories, expectations, and fears. It is not you. The real you is whoever is there now, reading this in silence. The presence that observes everything without judgment. This is the turning point. This is where suffering begins to dissolve, not because it's gone, but because it no longer dominates you. And when that happens, something changes, subtly, but irreversibly. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Watts had a liberating vision of life. He didn't see existence as a race or a ladder to be climbed. For him, living was like dancing. The meaning isn't in the destination, but in the movement, in the lightness of the now. And when we begin to understand this, anxiety loses its power. The fear of failure loses its meaning. Because there's no getting there, there's only being here. But how can you be here if everything around you pushes you forward, toward later, toward tomorrow? The mind is always projecting. When I achieve that, then yes. When this is over, then I'll live. But Watts reversed this logic. He said that the fear of death stems from the fear of living. and that we run from death precisely because we never allow ourselves to fully immerse ourselves in the present. Think about it. Death is not the opposite of life, but the opposite of birth. Life is now, the moment you breathe, in the silence between one thought and the next, in this very moment. Most people try to control life as if they could hold the wind. But, as Watt said, trying to control it is like holding water in your hands. The more force you exert, the more it escapes. And this constant effort is tiring. It generates anguish. It makes everything heavier than it needs to be. It's only when you let go, truly let go, that freedom begins to emerge. Not the freedom the world sells, made of endless choices and false promises, but an inner freedom, one that doesn't depend on anything external, a freedom born of acceptance. Acceptance isn't resignation, it's courage. The courage to be who you are now, without being ashamed of it, to look at your story without wanting to erase chapters, to embrace your mistakes as part of the journey, not as stains on your soul. And this acceptance begins in silence, not in the noise of the mind, but in the space between thoughts. Watt said that the deepest answers are not found in words, but in this space. And when we learn to listen to this silence, everything changes, not because external circumstances change, but because the way we relate to them dissolves. This is the point where suffering ceases to be an enemy and becomes a guide, where pain becomes a teacher, where consciousness awakens, not as a pretty theory, but as a living experience. And as we peel back these layers, we realize that much of what we believe to be us was just noise, inherited beliefs, fears that weren't even ours, repeated patterns as if we were trapped in an invisible cycle. But awakening consciousness isn't about forcibly destroying all this. It's about observing, because, as Alan Watts said, only what is observed with presence can be transformed. And it's curious how, in this process, we begin to realize how much we were living for a character, a social role, a name, a profession, a history, as if we were the sum of the expectations placed upon us. But the hidden truth, the one that bothers but also liberates, is that you are not that role. You are the stage. You are the space where everything happens. And this space is free. But the ego doesn't like this. It wants definitions, labels, security. It needs to feel in control. Because the ego lives in the past and the future. It doesn't know how to live in the present. And that's why when you immerse yourself in the now, it begins to weaken. It resists, it makes excuses. It screams with thoughts like, "This isn't practical. This is a waste of time. You should be producing." But this noise is just fear in disguise. This is where the journey begins to take on a new color, because you begin to question everything you've always accepted as truth. You begin to see that it's not life that's pressuring you. It's your resistance to life that creates the pressure. You begin to realize that suffering intensifies not because you feel too much, but because you constantly try to control what you feel. And when you stop fighting what you feel, what happens? The pain is still there, but it changes. It stops being a monster and becomes a messenger. It doesn't disappear, but it speaks. And you listen. And when you listen carefully, you realize it's not trying to bring you down. It's trying to wake you up. This kind of listening, this silent, non-judgmental internal listening, is one of the most revolutionary acts you can practice, because it radically shifts your mindset. You stop asking yourself, "How do I get out of this pain?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to show me?" And this simple shift in question has a profound impact. It's at this point that transformation begins to become real, not as something external, like a new phase of life or a major turning point, but as something internal, intimate, almost imperceptible. You begin to feel like you can exist without needing to prove anything, that you can breathe without needing to justify your existence. Acceptance at this level is no longer a concept, it's a state, a place of rest, a silence where everything is allowed to be. Watts called this dancing with life, rather than trying to command it. When you dance, you're not trying to get somewhere. You just move, feel, respond. And this is where you understand that life doesn't have to make sense all the time, that there's no big manual hidden somewhere, that there's no final answer that will fix everything. True relief comes not from answers, but from freeing yourself from the need to have them. When you let go of the illusion of control, what's left is lightness. It's clarity. It's that rare but deeply real feeling that you're exactly where you're supposed to be, even without understanding why. It's as if, for the first time, you can rest within yourself. And that's the beauty of awakened consciousness. It doesn't require effort nor perfection, just presence. It doesn't want you to change who you are just to stop hiding behind who you're not, because there's no persona that compares to the authenticity of simply being. Now, as you let these thoughts sink in, perhaps something inside you is already beginning to stir, not as a grand revelation, but as a subtle sensation, a new space opening up within, a space where there's no longer so much need to escape, a space where even suffering can be welcomed with more tenderness. When you begin to realize that it's not the content of your thoughts, but the space that contains them, something essential reorganizes within. You stop searching for answers and start cultivating presence. You stop pursuing a fixed purpose and begin to feel the rhythm, the dance of what's happening now. And this is where the mind, accustomed to control, enters a crisis. How do I live without a final destination, without the guarantee that everything will work out? The point is that working out was never an endpoint. It was always a story told to try to tame uncertainty. Watts was making precisely this point. Life is not a problem to be solved. It is an experience to be lived. Pain, when embraced, becomes a lens. It magnifies what was previously blurred. It reveals the hidden mechanisms behind your mindset, the invisible mechanisms that sustain your decisions and sabotages. It reveals the hidden truth you've avoided for fear of the impact it might cause. And the impact happens, but it's not destruction, it's displacement. It's like moving a key piece within an internal labyrinth and suddenly realizing there was a passage you'd never noticed. The fear of death, for example, is rarely about the end itself. It's about the feeling of not having lived fully before the end arrives. It's as if something inside us knows that wasting the now is the only real way to die before our time. Watts dismantles this fear by drawing attention to the obvious we forget. Life and death are movements of the same process. What is born changes. What changes dies. What dies is reborn in another form. Resisting this is resisting the flow of existence itself, and that hurts. It hurts because it's pointless. It hurts because it goes against the nature of all living things. When you let go of the illusion of control, you discover another kind of power. Not the power to make reality obey, but the power to respond to reality with inner freedom. This is the kind of freedom that doesn't weigh you down, that doesn't become another ego project, that doesn't trap you in endless goals of spiritual performance. It's the freedom to say yes to what is, even when it hurts, without confusing yourself with the pain. It's the yes that observes, learns, and transforms, not the yes that surrenders to the drama. And in this lucid surrender, because it's not abandonment, it's lucidity, you find an acceptance different from that which common sense sells. Acceptance isn't throwing in the towel. It's letting go of the fight against what you can't control and, with that, regaining the energy to transform what you can. True acceptance is both pragmatic and profound. It doesn't paralyze you. It disidentifies you from despair. You stop being the problem and return to being the observer who sees paths. In the silence between thoughts, where the mind doesn't dictate the conversation, you access a kind of clarity that isn't intellectual. It's not a conclusion, it's a perception. It's not a thesis, it's a state. You feel you're here, whole, without needing to justify your existence. And curiously, it's precisely from this place of stillness that your best decisions emerge, because they're not reactive, not driven by fear or need. They emerge as natural movements of consciousness when it's not busy trying to prove itself. Perhaps that's why Watts was so insistent on dismantling the ego without demonizing it. He didn't say, do away with the ego. He said in practice, see it for what it is. A tool, a mask that helps the play, but is not the actor. The suffering is great when the mask sticks to your face, when you feel you need to defend it at any cost, when any criticism of it feels like an existential threat. What pain tries to teach you is that you no longer need to fight for a role. You can inhabit the entire scene, and the entire scene encompasses light and shadow, strength and fragility, courage and fear. Mature acceptance embraces wholeness. It doesn't transform you into a statue of eternal peace immune to life. On the contrary, it makes you more human, more permeable, more truthful. You don't harden to survive. You become porous to feel. And precisely because of this, you don't break so easily. There's a point in the journey where revelations stop being mental fireworks and become subtle, almost silent. There's no longer a need for grand epiphanies to move forward. There's constancy. There's intimacy with silence itself. There's a confidence that doesn't depend on promises of the future because it's born from a direct experience with the present. You realize you can make it through, that you've made it through before, and that what sustained you wasn't control, it was presence. Diving into this level of perception changes the way you relate to time. The past loses its power to imprison you, and the future loses its power to frighten you, not because you forget the past or ignore the future, but because they cease to be the only lenses available. The primary lens becomes the present, not as a motivational slogan, but as a real, concrete, repeated, almost artisanal practice. Breathing, observing, feeling, choosing. And it's from this place that you see the dance of beginning and end, of pain and healing, of chaos and order. The dance where each step isn't a means to another step, it's whole in itself. And when life is seen this way, suffering doesn't disappear completely, but rather repositions itself. It becomes a step in the choreography, not the choreographer. He can slow you down, change the rhythm, create a new music, but he no longer leads alone. If you feel something inside you open, even just a little, that's enough. That's how it starts, with cracks in the old structure, with tiny gaps for air to enter, with gaps of silence between sentences that once came automatically, with tiny daily decisions that point to a greater transformation. It doesn't have to be grand, it has to be real. And it is along this thread of truth, personal, non-transferable, intimate, that awakened consciousness walks, without haste, without manuals, without the pretense of being the final answer, only with the willingness to continue looking, observing, letting go, and allowing life to do what it has always done, flow through you. If you've made it this far, it's because something resonated within you. Maybe it was a memory, a strange silence, or just that feeling of, this is what I needed to hear today. And if at any point in this video something resonated with you, if any part touched something true within you, consider subscribing to the channel. That's precisely the idea, to create spaces for reflection, with conversations that go beyond the surface and accompany you on this journey within yourself. Oh, and if this message spoke to you in any way, leave a comment below with the phrase, "That message was for me." It's a simple way for me to know that you were here, until the end, present with us in this conversation. If you'd like, leave a like. Not out of obligation, but because it shows that this connection truly happened. And it helps this type of content reach those who might need the same words that touched you today. There is a video here that complements this subject. Click and stay with me there. We still have a lot to explore together.